It was a Thursday morning, too early for visitors, too late for any good news. The rain had softened into a mist over the Blue Ridge Mountains, and the wind carried the scent of wet leaves through the cracked kitchen window. I had just sat down with my coffee, staring at the same corner of the table where Marilyn used to keep her leather journal, when the alert on my phone buzzed twice. I didn't expect to see what I saw. A wire transfer confirmation from First Carolina Bank, $5,000, from a sender I knew all too well, Grant Cole, my son-in-law. I dropped the mug. The coffee hit the floor, splashing onto the tile and staining the hem of my jeans. I barely noticed. Just 3 nights ago, I'd driven up to Manhattan and handed Grant a letter. It was written on simple stationery, typed carefully on my old Smith Corona, the same one I used for school recommendations back when I was principal. The letter was a formal request for a personal loan, $180,000, enough to save my house from foreclosure, cover some medical bills I hadn't told Rebecca about, and keep the last piece of Marilyn's memory from being auctioned off by strangers. I had hoped for dignity. What I got was laughter. Grant read my letter like it was a piece of bad fiction. His lips curled at the corners as if the request amused him. "You, a loan from me," he said, eyes gleaming with that signature smugness. "Jerry, you're asking a man you once called a virus in a tailored suit for money." He wasn't wrong. I had said that. After he refused to come to Marilyn's funeral, citing business obligations. After he made Rebecca cry on Christmas because she wouldn't sign off on some trust amendment. I didn't trust him then. I don't now. "It's a loan, Grant," I said calmly, "with interest." He chuckled, folded the letter slowly, and slid it back across the marble counter of his penthouse. "You're funny, old man," he said. "What would Marilyn think of you now?" That cut deeper than I expected. I left without another word, drove the 9 hours back to Asheville through sheets of rain, gripping the wheel until my knuckles turned white. I figured I'd never hear from him again. But now, $5 million? No note, no call, just a silent explosion of zeros in my checking account. And that's when I heard the knock. 3 short taps, a pause, 2 more. Not frantic, not polite. Deliberate. I opened the door slowly. There stood a woman in her late 60s, silver hair in a neat bun, trench coat, umbrella, eyes sharp, scanning me like she'd memorized my face years ago. In her hand was something wrapped in plastic, thin, rectangular, familiar. Without introducing herself, she held it out. "Mr. Wallace," she said softly, "this belonged to your wife. She wanted you to have it, but only when the money came." It was Marilyn's journal, the one I thought I'd buried with her. I didn't reach for the journal right away. My hands stayed at my sides, stiff as boards. The rain began to fall harder behind her, and for a moment, the only sound between us was the soft tapping of drops on her umbrella. My eyes were locked on the journal, leather-bound, weathered, the spine just slightly frayed at the top. I knew every mark on it. Marilyn never went a day without writing in that thing. Recipes, dreams, fragments of poems she'd never admit were hers, but I had buried it with her. Or at least, I thought I had. The woman, still silent, still composed, took a single step forward, crossing the threshold of my porch without permission, but with purpose. "She gave it to me," the woman said, 7 years ago, just after her diagnosis. My throat closed. I hadn't heard those words, "after her diagnosis," spoken aloud in years. "So who are you?" I asked, my voice coming out lower than I expected. She hesitated. "My name is Evelyn Hart. I was a friend of Marilyn's from a long time ago." That name meant nothing to me, yet there was a familiarity in her tone, a weight in how she said friend, like it carried more history than I could grasp standing barefoot in the doorway. I took the journal from her hand, careful like it might fall apart. My fingers trembled as I peeled back the front cover. The first page still had her writing, steady, elegant, always with that old fountain pen I kept by her bedside until the very end. "If Jerry ever sees this again, something has changed. And if something has changed, he needs to know the truth." I nearly dropped it again. Evelyn cleared her throat softly, her eyes scanning the inside of my house as if remembering where the furniture used to be. "May I come in?" she asked. I should have said no, should have asked more questions. But something about her presence, calm, composed, unsettlingly precise, made me step aside. She sat at the edge of the old armchair, the one Marilyn always used near the window, where the light was best for reading. I sat across from her, the journal still in my hands. The house was suddenly too quiet. "Why now?" I asked. "Why wait 7 years? And why the hell does this have anything to do with Grant wiring me a fortune?" Evelyn's lips pressed into a line. "Because," she said, "the money was the trigger. That was the instruction. Marilyn wanted you to receive this only if he gave you the money, no matter how or why." I opened to the next page. There, in ink faded slightly with time, was a name I hadn't seen in decades, and beside it, a child's drawing, a house, a woman, a man, a girl. 3 figures, not 4, not Rebecca, just 3. I looked up at Evelyn. My heart was pounding now, louder than the rain. "What am I looking at?" She didn't blink. "The past, Mr. Wallace, and the reason your son-in-law gave you $5 million. My hands were slick with sweat as I turned another page. The journal creaked faintly, an old, familiar sound that belonged to another lifetime. It was like Marilyn had walked back into the house without warning, scattering ghosts into every corner. But what haunted me more was that drawing. 3 figures. No Rebecca. "This makes no sense," I muttered, mostly to myself. "Rebecca would have been 7 when this was drawn. We were here. We were a family." Evelyn remained quiet, her eyes drifting out the rain-speckled window, as if bracing for something I hadn't yet uncovered. I flipped the next page. This time it was Marilyn's handwriting, not poetic, not whimsical like before, tighter, focused. If Jerry is reading this, then Grant has honored the arrangement. I don't know why he would. He despised me at the end. But if he has, then it means he finally knows, or finally accepted the truth, which means Jerry must know too. My mouth went dry. I didn't recognize this version of Marilyn. She sounded calculated, like she had been writing in code, not in reflection. Evelyn leaned forward just slightly. "She told me to never contact you unless the money showed up," she said. "That was the deal. The journal was a key, not just to what she hid from you, but to what she and Grant shared." I blinked hard. "What she and Grant what?" She hesitated. The silence drew out between us like a taut wire. "It wasn't what you think," she said finally, "but it was enough to change everything." I stood up, journal still clutched tight, and paced to the fireplace. The logs in the hearth were old and dry, untouched since winter. Marilyn used to insist we light it even in March. For warmth of soul, not skin, she'd say. I turned to Evelyn, my voice hardening. "Grant never respected Marilyn. He mocked her. He didn't even show up when she died." Evelyn nodded slowly. "And yet, 7 years later, he wired you $5 million. Not for Rebecca, not for charity, not out of guilt. For you. And only after reading that loan letter." She stood, pulling a folded piece of paper from her coat pocket. "She made me promise I'd bring you this too. I haven't read it, but it's addressed to both you and Grant." I took the letter with shaking hands. It was sealed with red wax, Marilyn's old stationery, the kind she used only for anniversaries. But what stunned me most was the date written on the front. April 9th, 1997, nearly 30 years ago. 10 years before Grant and Rebecca ever met. The implications hit me like a gut punch. "That's impossible," I whispered. "He wasn't even in our lives then." Evelyn's voice was steady. "He was." April 9th, 1997. That date shouldn't have meant anything to Grant. But I remembered it, not for what happened, but for what didn't. Marilyn had gone silent for nearly 3 days that week, said she was visiting a friend in Charlotte. When she came back, her smile was rehearsed, and her hands trembled every time she touched Rebecca's hair. At the time, I thought it was exhaustion, maybe stress. But I'd learned to let Marilyn have her silences. Now I was wondering what she had hidden inside them. I stared at the envelope, still sealed in red wax, the initials MW engraved faintly on the back. Marilyn Wallace, my wife, for 32 years. My partner in everything, or so I believed. You're telling me Grant was in Marilyn's life before Rebecca ever brought him home? I asked, my voice cracking between disbelief and something colder. So are you saying she knew him before? Evelyn sat down again, slowly this time, like the weight of the rain was starting to reach her bones too. I'm not saying anything. Marilyn is. That's why she left this. I sat opposite her, placed the letter down on the table between us, and stared at it like it might combust. I didn't open it. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I turned back to the journal, flipping more pages with increasing urgency. There were months' worth of entries, some mundane, grocery lists, memories of teaching Rebecca how to ride a bike, musings on the nature of regret, but woven between them were pieces of something darker, vague references to choices she couldn't undo, names not familiar to me, and always a growing fear of something resurfacing. Then I hit a page that stopped me cold. He found me. After all these years, he found me. He said he forgave me, but he didn't look like forgiveness. He looked like revenge wrapped in good intentions. I told him never to contact Jerry, never to touch Rebecca, but now he's with her. I looked up at Evelyn, the breath knocked clean out of my lungs. Grant, she nodded. He wasn't just some ambitious tech CEO who married into your family, Jerry. He had a reason, and so did Marilyn. My fingers curled around the edge of the journal until the leather creaked. The house suddenly felt smaller, the walls closer. The clock in the hallway ticked louder than it had in years. Everything I thought I knew about Marilyn, about my daughter's husband, it was unraveling like thread from a coat sleeve. I stood abruptly and crossed the room to the bookshelf, where a dusty metal box sat tucked behind volumes of old literature. I hadn't opened it in years. It was where Marilyn kept letters that she said were for rainy days. Inside, amidst birthday cards and hospital receipts, was a photograph I didn't remember ever seeing. A teenage boy, standing beside Marilyn, not smiling, her arm around him loosely, his eyes, Grant's eyes. I staggered backward. Evelyn saw it in my face. He wasn't a stranger to her, Jerry. He was part of her past, a part she never told you about. And now, she gestured toward the journal, he's part of yours too. I turned toward the sealed letter again, the wax glinting under the low light of the kitchen. It was time to open it. My hands hovered over the wax seal like it might burn. The red was chipped at the edges, but still intact. Marilyn had always been meticulous with her letters. No smudges, no cross-outs, just precise thoughts in her careful cursive. I remembered how she used to sit at the kitchen table in the early mornings, coffee steaming by her elbow, pen in hand like a sword of quiet truth. But this letter didn't feel like truth. It felt like a confession wearing a disguise. I cracked the seal and unfolded the page slowly, the paper soft with age but firm with tension. Evelyn didn't move. She didn't speak, just sat there like a sentinel of secrets. The first line hit harder than I expected. To Gerald and Grant, if you are reading this, then the line has finally been crossed. The letter was dated over a decade before Rebecca ever brought Grant home, long before I had any reason to suspect my wife was carrying a burden she never let me touch. Grant, I told you never to look for me. You promised. But I always knew you would break that promise. It's in your nature, to uncover, to dig, just like your father. I froze. Just like your father. Those words curled around my chest like smoke. I kept reading, my eyes jumping ahead even as my mind screamed to slow down. You were only a boy when I left that life behind, a boy with too much pain in your heart and too many questions in your eyes. I made a choice, Grant. I chose safety. I chose silence. I chose to start over. And I did with Jerry, with Rebecca, with a life I built from scratch because the truth of who you were, of who I was back then, would have torn that life apart. I felt the room tilt slightly. My knees buckled, and I sat down hard on the edge of the couch. Evelyn looked at me, finally speaking again. He's her son, isn't he? I couldn't say it. I just nodded. Marilyn had a child before me, before Rebecca, before the life I thought we shared from beginning to end, and she never told me. I turned the letter over, needing it to end, needing it to give me one clean line that made it all make sense. Jerry, if you are reading this, I'm sorry. I carried this lie not because I didn't trust you, but because I was afraid it would change the way you looked at me, and I couldn't bear that. But if Grant has given you the money, it means he finally understands. That forgiveness isn't clean. It's earned. And this is me earning it, far too late. Below the final sentence, a single line had been scribbled in smaller writing, a kind of postscript she must have added later. Tell Rebecca the truth gently, and tell her I loved her enough to lie. The room fell into a vacuum of silence. All I could hear was the rain. I looked at Evelyn. She didn't look surprised, just tired, like someone who'd been waiting a long time for someone else to catch up. I couldn't speak. My throat was closed, my chest tight. All I could think about was Rebecca, my daughter, Grant's half-sibling. The silence after I finished reading that letter wasn't peaceful. It was loud, louder than any scream Marilyn and I ever exchanged in 32 years of marriage. It howled inside me, tore at my memories, rewrote them while I watched helplessly. Rebecca, my daughter, the child I rocked to sleep in the nursery we painted sky blue together, the girl whose knees I bandaged, whose college tuition I fought to pay, whose wedding I walked her through, blind to what stood beside her at the altar. Grant, her husband, my son-in-law, Marilyn's son, the man I hated for how he treated her, how cold he was with Rebecca, how arrogant he became as his fortune grew. And now I saw that same coldness as something inherited, shaped not just by privilege but by pain. I stood slowly, as if moving too fast would shatter something invisible in the room. Does Rebecca know? I asked. Evelyn shook her head. No, Marilyn never told her. She planned to, near the end, but the cancer took her faster than expected, and then, when Grant showed up again, everything changed. I paced the room, one hand clutching Marilyn's journal, the other still trembling slightly from the letter. So what? Grant finds her, realizes she has a new life, a family, a daughter, and decides to what? Infiltrate it? Marry into it? Evelyn's expression didn't change. If anything, it softened. He didn't marry her to hurt you, Jerry. He didn't come for revenge, but he needed answers. And when he realized Rebecca didn't know anything, he saw an opportunity. Maybe to belong, maybe to punish Marilyn, maybe both. I sat again, heavier this time. My legs didn't want to hold the weight of what I now carried. I thought back to the early days of Grant and Rebecca's relationship, how fast it moved, how dismissive he was of family holidays, how careful he seemed around me. Not cautious like a respectful son-in-law, but measured, controlled. He had been watching me, judging me, wondering what kind of man replaced the mother who left him behind. And now, 7 years after Marilyn's death, he had sent me a fortune, not as charity but as a trigger, a signal, the final piece of a story I didn't know I was part of. I looked at Evelyn. What do I do with this? Her answer was immediate. You tell your daughter the truth. I looked down at the journal, at the photo of Marilyn and a teenage Grant, at the letter that had split my life clean in two. How? I asked, not even trying to hide the tremor in my voice. How do I tell her the man she married is her brother? Evelyn winced. Half-brother, same mother, different fathers, but it doesn't matter, you know what it means. I did. The implications spiraled through me like a storm. This wasn't just betrayal, it wasn't just loss. It was a collapse of foundations, moral, emotional, familial. And yet, there was one more page in Marilyn's journal bookmarked with a pressed violet, her favorite flower. The ink there was newer, fresher. It had been added not long before she died. The truth will hurt, but silence is what kills love. If Jerry reads this, tell him I never stopped choosing him, even when I was afraid, even when I failed. My hands closed the journal slowly. Then, for the first time in years, I wept. Not for Marilyn, not for Grant, for Rebecca, and for the silence that waited inside her phone, not yet knowing what was coming. I stared at my phone for over an hour before I could touch it. It sat on the kitchen counter next to Marilyn's journal, glowing faintly with missed notifications. A voicemail from the mechanic, an email from the bank, a message from Rebecca. "Hey Dad, just checking in. You okay? Call me when you can. Love you." I listened to her voice 3 times. That last part, "love you," had always sounded effortless. But now, with the truth caving in around me, it sounded fragile, like it could splinter under the weight of what I had to tell her. Evelyn sat quietly across from me, no longer offering advice, just waiting. The rain had stopped, but the clouds still hung low over the hills. Everything outside felt muted, grayscale, as if the world knew the moment had shifted. I picked up the phone. My thumb hovered over her name, then pressed. It rang 3 times before she picked up. "Hey Dad." Her voice was bright, relieved. "I was getting worried. You feeling okay?" My mouth didn't work at first. "Rebecca," I finally managed. "We need to talk." She went quiet. I could hear traffic in the background, the hum of New York City life, a car honk, a siren, then her voice again, softer now. "Is this about the loan?" Of course, she knew. Maybe Grant told her. Maybe she'd seen the transaction. "Sort of," I said. "It's about your mother and Grant, and something I should have known a long time ago." A pause. "You're scaring me, Dad." I looked at Evelyn. She gave a small nod, as if to say, now or never. So I told her. I told her everything, slowly, carefully, the way Marilyn had asked me to in her letter. I told her about the journal, the sealed letter dated before she was born, the photograph, the name she didn't recognize. And then I told her what Evelyn had said, about Grant, about his past, and about the connection that should have stopped everything before it ever started. Silence. A long one. I didn't even hear the city anymore. Just breathing. Just the fragile, uneven breaths of someone whose world was being unstitched in real time. "You're saying—" Her voice cracked. "He's my brother?" "Half-brother," I said. "You didn't know. Neither of us did. Marilyn kept it from both of us." She didn't respond. Just a quiet gasp, and then nothing. I waited. Finally, she spoke again, her voice hollow. "I'm pregnant, Dad." My heart dropped into my stomach. "What?" "I was going to tell you next week. I wanted to be sure. I haven't even told Grant yet. But now—" I closed my eyes. The world tilted again, this time harder. The furniture around me blurred. The sound of Evelyn standing behind me barely registered. I had been so focused on the past, on Marilyn, Grant, the lies, I hadn't even thought about what this meant for the future. Rebecca was going to have a child, and that child was part of this tangled history. "Dad," she whispered, "what do I do?" I didn't have an answer. Not yet. Because the knock on my door wasn't done haunting me. Because there was still one more secret Evelyn hadn't told me, and it was about to change everything again. The phone slipped from my hand and hit the floor with a soft clatter. I didn't pick it up. I couldn't. Rebecca's voice still echoed in my mind. "I'm pregnant, Dad." Evelyn moved closer, placing a hand gently on my shoulder. I felt the pressure of her fingers, steady, but not comforting. More like an anchor holding me in place while the ground kept crumbling beneath me. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on the photo, the teenage Grant beside a younger Marilyn. He couldn't have been more than 15. His expression back then was the same as it is now, unreadable, guarded, like he had already learned the cost of vulnerability. I forced my voice to steady. "You knew about the pregnancy?" Evelyn's hand dropped away. She nodded slowly. "Yes. Marilyn told me when she was just a girl herself. She was 19, alone and terrified. The father wasn't in the picture. He vanished before Grant was even born." I turned to her. "And who was he? Who was Grant's father?" She didn't answer. Instead, she walked over to the journal, opened it to a marked page near the back and handed it to me. There was no writing, just a folded slip of paper tucked into the binding, faded, thin with hospital letterhead across the top. "Mount Sinai, birth certificate request." My breath caught when I read the name listed under father, Nathaniel Harwood. I hadn't heard that name in over 4 decades. No. The word fell out of me. That's impossible. But Evelyn's face told me it wasn't. Nathaniel Harwood had been my closest friend in college, my roommate, my best man. A charming, reckless man with no sense of boundaries and a gift for manipulation. He vanished during our junior year after being expelled for reasons no one would fully explain. Marilyn and I met the following spring. I remembered now the hesitation in her voice when I brought up Nathaniel, the way she'd changed the subject, claimed not to remember him clearly. She remembered. She remembered everything. And Grant was his son. I turned the page in the journal. I didn't tell Jerry about Nathaniel. I couldn't. He wouldn't have married me if he knew I had been with someone like that, someone he used to trust. I wanted to leave it behind. I didn't even want to keep the baby at first, but then I felt him kick, and everything changed. I leaned against the table, the paper shaking in my hand. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a fracture in every cornerstone of my past. Grant wasn't just the son Marilyn hid. He was the son of the man who nearly destroyed me. Evelyn finally spoke again. Jerry, Marilyn didn't keep this from you to be cruel. She kept it because she didn't believe you'd love her if you knew who she had been. And maybe she was right. I clenched my jaw. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my ears. Rebecca's voice came back to me. What do I do? What does anyone do when the people they love have been sculpting silence into truth? And then, a soft vibration. The phone on the floor lit up with a text from Grant. We need to talk. I know you know. And I need to show you something before it's too late. I stared at the screen. Was this an apology, or another secret waiting to collapse everything? I didn't respond to Grant's message right away. Instead, I watched the words fade from my screen, replaced by my own reflection in the black glass. Older, hollow-eyed, barely recognizable. I wasn't just reeling from the past anymore. I was being asked to walk straight into the present, with everything unraveling behind me and no clear path ahead. Evelyn gathered her coat. Her role here was done. The journal, the letter, the photo, she had delivered what Marilyn asked her to, but not without cost. Her face was pale, her hands unsteady. Before she stepped out the door, she looked at me one last time. Be gentle with Rebecca. She was always Marilyn's hope. And then she left. Just like that. The house felt empty again. Quiet in that way it gets when the truth finally settles into every corner. I sat there until dusk. Then I called Grant. He answered after a single ring. I figured you'd need time, he said, his voice more subdued than I'd ever heard it. You knew I'd find out. I hoped you would. There was silence between us, the kind that could either break something or mend it. You said you needed to show me something, I said. Meet me at the old train station in Weaverville, he said. 9 p.m. I'll be there. Why there? Because that's where Marilyn told me the truth. I didn't ask anything else. I arrived early. The Weaverville train station hadn't operated in years, just an empty platform, rusted tracks, and a cracked bench under a flickering lamplight. The air was heavy with the smell of wet pine and autumn smoke. I waited with the journal in my lap and Marilyn's final letter folded in my coat pocket. At exactly 9 p.m., Grant's black Tesla pulled up beside the gravel lot. He stepped out slowly, no suit tonight, just jeans and a sweater. He looked younger suddenly, less like a millionaire tech mogul, more like someone who'd been holding something in for too long. He walked toward me but didn't sit, just stood at the edge of the bench. "Thank you for coming," he said. I didn't respond. I transferred the money because I knew it would force this moment. Marilyn left instructions. She always said you wouldn't believe her, but maybe you'd believe me once you saw what she wrote. He reached into his jacket and pulled out something small, a flash drive. He handed it to me. "It's a video," he said. "She recorded it the day before she went into hospice. She wanted it saved. Wanted me to show it to you only if I gave you the money." "Why now?" I asked, finally finding my voice. His eyes were tired, red. "Because Rebecca's pregnant. And I can't let her bring a child into this world without knowing who I really am, or what I chose not to be. The admission cracked something in him, and in me. "You married your sister, Grant," he flinched. "Half-sister," he said quietly. "But yes, I did, and I loved her before I knew. By the time Marilyn told me, it was already too late." I stared at him. "Why didn't you leave?" He swallowed hard. "Because I thought I could protect her from the truth. But now, I know she deserves it. We all do." I looked at the flash drive in my hand. "What's on it?" His voice broke. "A goodbye, and a confession, from the only person who ever tried to love us both the best way she knew how." He turned to go. "You'll know what to do after you watch it." Then he disappeared into the dark. I sat under the flickering light, holding Marilyn's last message, too afraid to press play. It took me 3 hours to watch the video. I sat in the living room, surrounded by the quiet relics of a life I thought I understood. Framed photos, unopened mail, the worn grooves in the hardwood where Marilyn's rocking chair used to sit. The house held its breath with me, waiting. When I finally inserted the flash drive into my old laptop, the screen blinked to life with a single file. "For Jerry, only when you're ready." The video opened to Marilyn in a hospital gown. No makeup, no hair. The cancer had taken most of what made her look like herself, but her eyes were unmistakably hers. Soft, sad, steady. She was sitting up in bed, a blanket tucked around her shoulders. Behind her, the sterile walls of the hospice room looked too white, too clean, like nothing could live in them for long. She smiled at the camera. "If you're seeing this, Jerry, then Grant kept his word, and you finally know." I leaned forward, heart pounding. She took a breath. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, still wearing her wedding ring. "I won't ask for forgiveness, I already had more than I deserved, but I do want to explain, not for me, but for you, for Rebecca, for the family we built on silence." She looked down, as if rehearsing what came next. "I met Nathaniel Harwood when I was just out of high school. He was charming, intense, dangerous. He made me feel seen, in a way I wasn't ready for. By the time I realized who he really was, I was pregnant." Her hands tightened into fists. "He left the moment I told him. Vanished. I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents, not you. I moved to Chicago. Had the baby alone. Gave him up at 3 weeks. I couldn't keep him. I wasn't strong enough. I told myself I was doing what was best for him." She swallowed hard, tears filling her eyes now. "Years later I met you. You were kind. Safe. Good. I told myself I could start over, that my past didn't matter, but I always wondered about the boy I left behind." She paused. "Then one day he found me." My breath caught. Grant showed up at my office with a file, birth records, my address, my name. He said he'd spent 10 years trying to find me. I tried to keep him away. I begged him not to tell you. He was angry. He had a right to be. Her voice cracked. "But then he met Rebecca, and they fell in love." She looked up again, directly at me. I should have stopped it. I should have said something. But they were happy and I was afraid. Afraid of losing the two people I loved most. So I stayed quiet. And by the time I realized the damage I'd done, it was too late. A tear slid down her cheek. "I know what you must be feeling now, betrayal, rage, confusion. But Jerry, please, don't let this destroy what's left. Don't let it ruin Rebecca's life, or the baby she's carrying." She took a deep breath, voice trembling now. "Grant didn't do this to hurt anyone. He was searching for something, belonging, identity, and even though I failed him, I believe he truly loves Rebecca." Silence, then her final words. "You always believed in truth, Jerry, even when it hurt. So now I'm giving it to you, all of it. I love you, I always did, even when I was a coward." The screen faded to black. I sat in the dark, the hum of the laptop filling the silence she left behind. I didn't cry. I couldn't. Because the next voice I had to face wasn't Marilyn's. It was Rebecca's. And the truth I now carried was mine to give. I drove to New York the next morning, leaving before dawn. I didn't tell Rebecca I was coming. I needed time to rehearse the words I still didn't know how to say. The highway blurred past in greys and browns, the late autumn landscape quiet under a low, brooding sky. Every few miles, I considered turning back, not out of fear, but out of guilt. What right did I have to shatter her world when she'd done nothing to deserve the wreckage? But then I thought of Marilyn's face on that screen. I thought of her voice, fragile and steady, choosing to speak what I couldn't unhear. Truth doesn't protect us. It only offers us the chance to begin again. I arrived at Rebecca's apartment just after 3 p.m. She opened the door in sweats and a t-shirt, her hair pulled up messily. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from lack of sleep, but the kind that comes from knowing something is wrong and waiting for it to show its face. "Dad." Her voice cracked at the sight of me. I stepped inside, slowly. The apartment smelled like vanilla and laundry, safe, warm, untouched by the truth I carried in my hands. She sat on the edge of the couch, clutching a mug. I sat across from her and placed the journal and flash drive on the table between us. She looked at them. Her mouth tightened. "Is this everything?" "It's more than I ever wanted to know," I said. "But yes." Her eyes scanned my face. She was bracing for something, some small version of the truth, but not the whole of it. So I gave it to her. I told her who Grant really was. I told her about Marilyn's past, the baby she gave up, the man she feared, Nathaniel Harwood. I told her how Grant had found Marilyn, how he chose to stay quiet, how he let the past shape the love they built. And then I told her about the video. I watched her expression change with every detail. Not outrage, not denial, but something more devastating. Recognition. When I finished, she didn't cry. She just stared at the wall like it held a memory she hadn't unlocked yet. "She told me once," Rebecca whispered, "when I was 13, that she had done something in her youth she regretted. I asked if it was about cheating or hurting someone. She said no, she said it was something she kept buried because she thought it would protect everyone she loved." She blinked hard, swallowing emotion. "I thought she meant an affair, or something about her father. I never thought—" Her voice trailed off. She picked up the journal with shaking hands and opened it to the first page. Her eyes skimmed the ink. I saw the moment she found the drawing, 3 figures, not 4. She stared at it for a long time. "And Grant?" she asked softly. "He knows everything," I said, "and he loves you. That much is clear, but he's willing to walk away if it means protecting you." She closed the journal. Her face hardened, not with anger, but with something sadder. Acceptance.